Deep in the jungles of India, in the middle of spring 1819, Captain John Smith, a British cavalry officer, stumbles across something remarkable, the Ajanta Caves. Looking like something out of myth, or perhaps even fantasy, they had been abandoned and forgotten by the rest of the world save a small group of locals. And more than 200 years later, I got to go there and talk to some of the experts about what these caves were and how they were made. Hi everyone, this is Travels with an Archaeologist. I'm the archaeologist, now let's get into the travels. Located north of Aurangabad, the Ajanta Caves are even more impressive than what meets the eye precisely because of how they are made.
So this is Ajanta, and the really cool thing about this is carved out of one stone. This is not a piece of stone put onto a mountainside. This is the mountain that has been carved out.
The Ajanta Caves are not just one cave, but a series of 30, all sitting in this horseshoe canyon along the Waghur River. And the craziest thing? These caves were probably built in just a little over 20 years. Now, the history of research on this site is almost as interesting as the history of the caves themselves. The primary researcher of these caves, Walter Spink, spent the vast majority of his very long career studying these caves. He explored every nook and cranny and in the process discovered both the tiny mistakes and the genius that went into this carving. However, he was banned from certain caves and many of the tour guides didn't like him. Why? Well, have you ever seen my video on Knossos and the Minoans? Check it out if you haven't. I point out pretty much every single mistake the tour guides and the original researchers made. So why is that relevant? Well, basically, Walter Spink did the same thing at Ajanta, except he did it for 50 years. In person, in front of tourists, every time he came for a visit. You can see where this would annoy park employees and why the site today isn't terribly endeared to him. In fact, if you do visit the site, you'll never see a single mention of him, but researching the site, you'll see he's involved in just about everything that's been written on it. This is because he's the only researcher who actually, researched the history of the caves, at least in serious depth. Now, of course, there's a lot more I could say about Walter Spink and his history of research and his life, but the fact is, these videos tend to be about the archaeological site and not always the researcher. Just keep in mind that everything I'm about to tell you comes from Walter Spink or the people who built their work off of his observations. The first phase of caves were built in the 2nd century BCE, and they're closer to the center of the whole complex. They were fully completed during the days of Hinayana Buddhism during the Satavahana period. Buddha was not yet depicted as a human, but they rather used symbols, with Buddha himself depicted as this stupa. Buddhism is still very young in this period, and it was among the very first places the Buddhists would come in the region for quiet contemplation and prayer. But it was not spirituality that brought them here, it was geology.
So one of the reasons that carving this thing is so easy, if you want to call any of this easy, is because of this nice volcanic black basalt. It doesn't fracture and it doesn't crack. It minimizes your risk of anything shattering or breaking.
And if anything did break or crack, which really wasn't that often, they fixed it with mud and plaster. The caves here are already a work of nature as well as art, providing the right kind of stone that could be carved into one solid block like this. The caves also sit on a transit route, making it an ideal stopping point for pilgrims. And already, the people here show great skill and intelligence. Everything here needed to be planned ahead of time. They had to know the right type of rock, they had to lay out the design ahead of time, and they had to shape it perfectly, because any imperfection was there forever. And despite the paintings that adorn these caves today, they weren't actually there in the original form.
Now, the first Buddhists who came here, they were very austere and sparse, but they came back about 500 years later, and they made things that were far more elaborate under the
Vakataka.
I'm going to dub that over in editing.
You know, the sad thing is, I really did know how to pronounce it at the time. I practiced saying it right 20 times, but then every time the camera went on, I choked. Yeah. Anyway, these Vakatakas were powerful, and during this period, they were experiencing a golden age. They ruled across this whole swathe of territory, encompassing 100 different people and languages, totaling a little under 1/3 of modern India. King Harisena had taken the kingdom to its greatest extent, ushering in a golden age of wealth and power, which had not been seen in Maharashtra since the days of the Mauryans. And it was during this golden age that the rest of the caves were constructed, specifically throughout the reign of the aforementioned King Harisena in the late 5th century, which means the Vakataka caves were made in just under 2 decades. And if you're wondering how that's possible, well, they worked in teams. Various nobles and court attendees sponsored their own teams, and they went in stages, carving out the cave, then the rough cut of features, then smoothing out with finer details.
So if you ever tried grinding on a rolling pin or with a mortar and pestle, you'll find that everything that you grind against gets smoother. And that's exactly what you do here to get the smooth texture. You take a much harder rock and you learn to grind it against the walls and the sculptures until you get the kind of smoothness that you're looking for.
So this can be done fairly easily when you have a whole team working on it. Then the painters went to work, not just on the new caves, but on the old Satavahana caves as well. And they painted some of the greatest art in Buddhism, specifically Mahayana Buddhism, displaying the wealth and abundance of this Vakataka kingdom, as well as detailed portrayals of the Jatakas, which is scenes from the Buddha's previous lives, if you don't know that. And within this second Vakataka phase of construction, 3 separate phases themselves are detailed. Now, to give you an admittedly very simplified overview, Phase 2A, they start building caves here. Already they know it's good rock from these Satavahana caves. And this is a period of relative calm with everybody working together. Phase 2B, a civil war between 2 noble families breaks out, and the noble family who controls the territory saw work on their cave continue, while work on their rivals' caves had stalled. And Phase 2C, the civil war is over, and work on all caves resumes again. During this time in Cave 1, which belonged to Harisena himself, work never stopped. This is because you can fight amongst each other all you want, but don't mess with the king. The result is that we get a chronology that looks somewhat like this when you lay it out on a map. But of course this narrative is disputed. As I said before, Walter Spink, despite being the most prolific and long-term researcher of the caves, is not the only one to write about them. Yet, as I sat down to read competing narratives, I discovered something interesting. Very few of these narratives actually discuss chronology at all. They talk about the artistic representations and construction methods and so on, but they skate over any mention of time. And those few I found that did propose something different, their arguments were, honestly, underwhelming. Most of it seems to be based on the fact that caves this intricate and numerous just couldn't have been built in 2 decades. But based on that logic alone, it can be hard to argue. So what evidence does Spink have to back up his claim? Well, as it turns out, a lot. Harisena is the only king whose name we see an inscription of at any point in Ajanta. And while some of these caves have no dedication at all, those that do appear to be from his time, either from Harisena himself or one of the members of his court, in which case they will reference Harisena. Work did not continue for long after his death, for reasons I'll get into later, but there is no inscription of his father or grandfather or anything at Ajanta, nor is there an inscription of his son. And yes, they did leave their own inscriptions elsewhere in India, and they allow us to pinpoint the start and end date for Harisena's reign, so it's not like there's a dearth of evidence that point us this way. But even if you don't believe that, well, it turns out the caves also have separate styles. We can see them experimenting with expanding other caves, such as styles in decoration and fluting. These styles are visible as belonging to separate phases of construction, sometimes even within the same caves. And we can track them down to a year as artists refined their work and adopted different styles. And while the caves look perfect and symmetrical to the untrained eye, Walter Spink identified numerous imperfections as they continued building and learning from their mistakes. And looking at diagrams of caves like this from above can really put it into some perspective as to how they were evolving their current styles. Finally, there are some places where there is no decoration because they were low priority, and this fits with the narrative I've just described. Because perhaps the most important fact behind this is that none of the caves from the Vakataka period actually are complete, except for the one belonging to the king, and even then it has not been dedicated as a temple. It was, in the words of those I spoke to in India, abandoned mere days, perhaps even mere hours, before it can be completed. So why couldn't these caves be completed? Because they obviously had a lot of effort and wealth and work and heart put into them. Well, the thing is, Harisena died, and he seems to have died rather suddenly. And the great Vakataka Empire died with him. The civil wars that occurred between the nobles broke out again, and this time the royal family was involved as well. Harisena's son was killed by his vassals, and the Vakataka Empire fragmented. And this leads to the final phase 3 of construction at Ajanta, that of the rush to the finish. The caves which were dedicated had these tiny Buddhas carved into them, sometimes not even finished, as the local townspeople and surviving nobles rushed to complete their holy altars. This phase was probably only 1 or 2 years following Harisena's death because money and time were both running out. War is an expensive business, and even more so when it is the result of an empire's fall. So, ordinary people and villagers who wanted to see these caves completed came up with some money to pay artists, but they couldn't pay for all of them. We see this reflected in the Pallava-era writer Dandin's Dashakumaracharita. I hope I said that right. Which, it is argued, uses prose to describe the fall of the Vakatakas. Think of it like Shakespeare's plays on British monarchs. The story is fiction, but the inspiration is fact. Trade and pilgrimage routes shifted so that the caves were no longer accessible, and the Vakataka royals who survived took refuge further north in Mahishmati, with Ajanta beyond their control. And for me, that is the real tragedy of Ajanta, that it ended before it could ever really begin. All of this money and effort went into making something truly beautiful, and it remained little used as work halted on the very brink of completion. The region was abandoned as the great powers fell to over 40 years of factionalism and fragmentation, and Ajanta just didn't matter anymore. The Chalukyas, another Hindu dynasty, eventually took over the area and returned it to stability roughly half a century later, but the memories of Ajanta were faint, and at any rate they had their own places of worship, one with a level of artistry and magnificence that dwarfed even Ajanta. But that is for my next video. I'd like to thank Shuba Khandekar in particular for so much of the information in today's video. She really was invaluable. She was able to provide a lot of information to me personally in Mumbai, and I'm only sorry I didn't have the time to go through all of it. I'm also grateful to the material she provided to help me make this video, including the timeline, chronology, floor plans, and a couple of other excellent reference photos. Anyway, that's all I have to say on the Ajanta Caves for today. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. And if you want to support the channel, I do have a Patreon that you can donate to with a link in the description. And until next time, I'm the Archaeologist, and this has been The Travels.